as researcher with several Italian universities. As recognized international speaker, he has delivered guest lectures in prestigious institutions in Malaysia, Italy, Pakistan, Singapore, and Indonesia. His research activity is devoted to business cycle analysis, capital theory, and entrepreneurship. Dr. Ferlito is author of 5 books and more than 30 scientific papers. He has applied his theoretical analysis to policy studies, in particular to the Malaysian and Indonesian property markets, issues of tax reform, financial literacy, cost of living, and agricultural policies. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Ferlito.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. I really thank the organizer, REII Connect, and Provalindo Nusa for having given me the opportunity to share my thoughts with you this afternoon. It's a bit strange not having the possibility to interact with the public, to see the people there. But I will try to do the best I can to deliver a meaningful session, which probably will be a bit different from what you have heard so far, and will touch the topic of the real estate sector in Indonesia, mostly from a macroeconomics perspective, so taking into account more general considerations about the economy. So allow me to share my presentation here. Okay. Okay, so the title that I gave to my presentation, more in summary, is Real Estate in Indonesia, Macroeconomic Trends and Market Outlook. Here are my references, my appointments, and my social media, the social media of Provalindo, the one of the Center for Market Education. So if you need to get in touch, feel free to contact me via these links. Today I will touch 4 different topics, and I hope that I will not exceed the patience of the audience. First of all, I will devote some time to the macroeconomic trends in the region, and in particular in Indonesia. And then I will jump to the real estate industry in Indonesia in 2020. The third point will be a discussion on the potential effects of the omnibus law on the property market. And finally, some concluding thoughts on the future of the real estate industry in Indonesia. As a premise, I need to say that obviously real estate and the general economy are closely related. Construction is a very important part of the Indonesian GDP. We're talking about 5 to 6% contribution in 2019, and in 2018 around 1.2 million people were working in the construction industry. And a big part of this contribution from the construction to the GDP is given by the real estate, which contributes to the Indonesian economy for a percentage that oscillates between 3.5 and 5%. We have to be conscious that there is a close connection between the housing market behavior and the development of general economic crisis. Economists like Vernon Smith, Nobel Prize, demonstrate that the 12 recessions that touched the United States between the Great Crisis in 1929 and the Great Recession in 2008 were preceded by declines in housing investment. So housing decline is a consistently superior indicator of both the duration and the depth of a recessions for the general economy. So there is, I think, a double-sided relationship between the housing market and the general economy. What happens in the housing market anticipates macro trend, this is important, but in turn, obviously, macro trends shape the housing market direction. But to observe what is going on in the housing market means to have quite an attentive look at the potential behavior of the general economy. Now, this year, I think that this has been mentioned already, has been a very peculiar year for the world economy. We had a huge exogenous shock, an external shock that was given. Pay attention. I really like to stress this, not by COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, but by domestic and international movement restrictions. Mostly all the governments around the world applied domestic and international movement restrictions in the attempt to stop the spread of the virus. And these policies are the ones that created difficulties into the world economy, not the virus per se. This is very important. And now that we have been in this situation since almost 1 year, we know that these kind of measures indeed do not have a significant impact on the spread of the virus, can be implemented only eventually to contain stress on the hospital systems. But lockdowns are not a solution for the virus spread. Unfortunately, in many countries, and I'm here sitting in my office in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, a climate of fear was created with these policies, and fear is obviously not good for the economy. And together with this climate of fear, we observe an unprecedented threat to human liberties. And I strongly believe that those nations that are less willingly to trade freedom for a certain promised safety will be the most resilient ones. Because of the importance of confidence on the economic system, the less people will be in the will to trade their freedom, and so to renounce to a normal life, the more these nations will be able to recover faster from the situation created by the lockdowns. Now let's take a look at the regional predictions on the economy. Here I have prediction from the IMF and from the Asian Development Bank. You can see that the latest prediction for Indonesia is a decline on 1.5% in 2020 and a growth of 6.1% in 2021. According to instead the Asian Development Bank, we have minus 1% in 2020 and plus 5.3% in 2021. So not too different from what has been predicted by the IMF. So the rebound that is expected for next year is between 5 and 6%. Let's say it's something better than what is predicted for neighbor countries, in particular for the decline in 2020. And I think that Indonesia is enjoying mainly 2 points of advantage that are, first of all, the presence of a big domestic market that, in example, Malaysia doesn't have, and then the movement restrictions, lockdowns, has been less strict in Indonesia than it has been in other countries. However, what we have to stress is that if we look at growth, spending money is not enough. So it is important to look at a sustainable growth. So the idea that government is going to spend money, and today we had the news that Indonesia has touched a very record debt, matters. So debt will not create a sustainable growth. But this is, of course, a topic for a different conversation. However, I believe that ceteris paribus, so given the present conditions, given the fact that we don't have a treatment for COVID-19 yet, and the international borders remain closed, and we have no clue on when international borders will be seriously reopened, and it's a pity that ASEAN is not discussing at least a regional level for this in a more serious way. So given this premise, I think that the best we can expect, if the situation on international borders and COVID is not going to change, is a reverse square root recovery. So I think that ceteris paribus, the forecasts from IMF and ADB are too optimistic, at least looking at, in general, at the region, not specifically at Indonesia. And after the normal rebound that we experienced after the end of the lockdown, probably we expect a more flat kind of economic development. So the risk ahead is a flat growth. And if we want to avoid this trap, I think that the strategies that need to be implemented are the following ones. Avoiding extending and generalized lockdowns, so going more on targeted measures, knowing that general lockdown is not going to help. We have to instill a message of confidence on a COVID-19 cure, and try not only to run like crazy after a vaccine. Rush on a vaccine is not going to help, is only going to create worse scenario, because a vaccine needs to be not only effective, needs to be only safe. So an approval which is too in a hurry is not safe for the people. So we should focus on different kind of treatments probably, and prevention, isolating the people that are more at risk. We should implement an ASEAN coordination strategy on international borders and boost the business sentiment. So these are the things that I think will help a more stable path of recovery next year. Having given this premise on the regional macroeconomic outlook, I will now start to discuss briefly the performances of the real estate industry in Indonesia in 2020. You can see here the last 3 years house price index from Moody's, so a very moderate growth in nominal terms at least. If we look at the last 10 years at the residential property price index, also in this case we see that prices are now stabilizing after the jump that was experienced up to probably 2014, that was the peak of the boom in the property market. And here we can see the CEIC data also on the residential property market for the last 15 years or 12 years. And I think that the thing that needs to be observed is that precisely from 2015, in nominal terms, we have a stabilization of prices. And this is, I think, the horizon, as I will mention later, that we have to keep in mind for any future development. Prices are not going to jump like they did in the past decades anytime soon. So the summary of the price trends from my perspective is that we should expect a moderate but stable growth in nominal terms, stable flat residential prices in real terms, and this brings us to the conclusion that the market has reached a certain level of maturity. So we need to deal with a more with less oscillations and less jumps in the prices. But specifically related to this period that we are experiencing of COVID, I think that developers and real estate observers and analysts should consider the emergencies of conflicting tendencies. So when we talk about the future price dynamics, I think we have inflationary tensions that will come from the fact that during a moment of crisis, investing in real estate, investing in properties is investing in something that is safe for the future. So people that have money will probably keep on investing in property as a sort of a cushion. But on the other side, we have more people struggling with their daily routine, with the daily life, because of unemployment and difficulties created by the lockdowns. And this will bring deflationary tensions. So I think that we will observe for the next few years a struggle between these two tensions. So when we have to make an analysis, we should try to make it the most as possible disaggregate, to understand which part of the market is going in which direction, rather than having a generalized discussion on prices. This, I think, is very important. Here we have more graphs on the residential property price index from Bank of Indonesia. Here you can see the variations. The percentage of change is very moderate over the past years. And what is comforting is that in Q2 we already observe a little jump into the property sales, both on annual terms and also in quarterly terms. So the market is somehow recovering, is rebounding from the first lockdown, but pay attention, it is important to check if this is only a temporary trend or something that is there to stay. Most probably we are going to have a stabilization after the rebound, so a more flat market. So the things that we can observe are a good sales rebound in Q2. As I mentioned, we should expect a stabilization in Q3 and Q4. Consider that in Q3 only 168 apartments were sold in Jakarta. So as also I mentioned earlier, it's very important to identify the micro tendencies behind the macro data. So when we analyze the tendencies and the tensions in supply and demand, we should consider where, what, and how much. So focus on disaggregate analysis. This is my suggestion. Now, third point, the effects of the omnibus law on the property market. In general, I think that the omnibus law is something that has to be very welcome for the Indonesian economy. Indonesia has struggled in regional terms, in terms of competitiveness against the neighbors like Singapore and Malaysia, but also against Vietnam in more recent time in attracting FDIs because of the red tape, the bureaucracy, infrastructure. And Indonesia, it seems that even before COVID, started to change pace, in example with the new industrial corridors. But the omnibus law improved and launched a very important signal for investors that Indonesia wants to do something different. And something different also from what the neighbor countries are doing. Because there are, as I will tell later, nationalistic tendencies that are emerging also in Singapore and Malaysia that will make foreign investment run away from those countries. But Indonesia instead applied a strategy of opening, of making things easier for investment, and I have, in example, analyzed also the consequences on agriculture that are very, very positive. So simplification is always a business booster, mostly in terms of mood boosting. So somehow the omnibus law will take time to be implemented, but it is already creating a mood that is positive for investment. And it is also good. There is also a good opening for some category of foreign buyers. In example, will it stimulate directly the demand for properties? Yes, but I think we must look at this from a wider perspective. What do I mean? Can we expect foreign buyers to flock into the country? Not per se, not in itself, because the regulation for foreign buyers still remain restrictive. So what then? What is good? Why the omnibus law can be good for the property market? The main point is boosting Indonesia's competitiveness on the international scenario, motivating investors and multinational companies to jump into the country when they are fleeing not only from China but also, as I mentioned, from Malaysia and Singapore, which are developing non-business friendly policies. Both Malaysia and Singapore are becoming more and more restrictive not only for foreign labor, but also for expatriates. This is very dangerous for these countries, but can be an opportunity for Malaysia to attract those businesses that feel threatened by the most recent policies in Singapore and Malaysia, that has been historically international hubs for multinational companies. Now maybe is the time for Indonesia to take over and to take opportunities from this. So the omnibus law can stimulate the demands because it attracts FDIs and create incentives for domestic business too. So by improving the business sentiments, the omnibus law can create a spillover effect on the real estate sector. First of all, a spillover effect on the industrial real estate because of manufacturing, logistics. So multinational companies that relocate in Indonesia will need obviously new places where to run their operations, and indirectly there will be a positive effect on expatriates that will be more in the will to move to Indonesia if they are allowed, at least at a certain extent, to buy properties. But I think that the biggest impact will be on industrial properties if globally Indonesia will be able to market the omnibus law together with other initiatives that were implemented earlier this year and last year in order to attract FDIs and multinational companies into the country. This is a big opportunity that Indonesia cannot miss. So the omnibus laws needs to be looked at as a business booster and in particular as a competitiveness catalyst. Okay? This is very important. The real estate industry can benefit from this as it can benefit from a general strategy to boost Indonesia's international economic role with initiatives such as the economic corridors that have been studied earlier this year. Indirectly, the property sector will benefit from businesses entering the country, and I have in mind in particular the impact on the industrial and commercial real estate. I have, however, a negative note on the omnibus law, briefly, for what it regards the creation of a central authority for affordable homes. I really beg the Indonesian government not to walk this path. This experiment was a complete disaster in Malaysia. All the agencies in charge of affordable homes in Indonesia are running into debt, and the government was forced to freeze them. And I think we should look at the problem of affordability from a wider perspective, not simply as an issue of price-income ratio. Provalindo and CME are working on a project on this, on a new measure for affordability. But the issue should be addressed not with the problem of home ownership or property per se, but as more as an issue of social mobility, which means certain people are born poor. This is not their fault, but if they deserve and work hard, is there an institutional framework that allow them to improve their condition, to become better off, and therefore, if they want, eventually, as a free choice, to become homeowners, to buy a house? So, in this sense, we should look not at the problem of poverty, but the problem of prosperity creation. Okay, this is completely different perspective. Poverty is there, but how can we should not give a roof to the poor. We should make the poor no more poor, and eventually they can decide to buy a house because they are no more poor. And one of the key points in this, I think, is improving mobility through connectivity. Because the big risk with affordable homes is that the government is going to create slums in remote areas and create house for the poor in slums outside of good job opportunities means to keep the poor poor. so not working on social mobility. And a poor with a house remains a poor, but we don't want poor with a house. We want poor that are no more poor, and because they are no more poor, they can eventually buy a house. And again, in this struggle, connectivity is key. One idea is to create, in example, a more private-public partnership in the development of the transport system by involving the developers in the design and implementation of the transport as a part of wider project, rather than having them simply enjoying spillover effects from new commuting solutions. So what is happening now is that the government build public transport and bear all the cost of public transport, usually with huge debt, and because of the development in the areas around the new stations, the developers enjoy spillover effects. The value of the area grows. So here we change perspective. We invite the developers to discuss the transportation projects together with the government, to run the transportation project, to build and run these new projects as part of the development of an area which is no more only housing development, but becomes more globally urban development through a system of private and public partnership, which is beneficial for government pockets, but also for developments and obviously for consumers. Another idea is to use the guarantee rent model developed by Jane Jacobs, and this was proposed in 1961 in New York by these activists. So the government and the developers should identify locations and projects where a certain numbers of units are reserved for the needy. The developers bill all the construction costs, but certain units are reserved for the poor, and the government subsidizes the rent, basically. And this is very important. This is very important that the initiatives left to the private developers, because the developers know which areas are good locations for job opportunities, and therefore they know how to promote social mobility. Obviously, this will mean to remove subsidies as soon as possible when the conditions of the people improve. So here we shift our focus from poverty to mobility, and from home ownership to flexibility, so to freedom of choice. This is very important. The bottom line is avoid to have a central authority to develop affordable houses, because this will be a complete disaster. This is, I think, the most critical part of the omnibus law with reference to the property market. So some concluding thought, so I can conclude within the time frame that was allocated to me. So the future will be very much shaped by the way out of the pandemic. I think that, considering everything, Indonesia is well placed for a fastest recovery because it gave up on prolonged and extensive lockdown. You can move around in Indonesia, something that we cannot do in Malaysia. I'm in the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur, and I cannot go to Kuala Lumpur. In Indonesia in particular, the rhetoric of fear didn't win the battle. People still care about their freedom. In Malaysia, the reaction was very, very different. Second point, the omnibus law is very helpful, is boosting the business confidence and attract investment, and this in turn will generate spillover effects on the property sector, in particular for industrial development. Third point, most probably in the near future prices will remain flat, in particular in real terms, if we consider compared to inflation. Residential demand is also expected to remain quite stable, so after the Q2 jump, most probably now the growth will be flatter. Which are the new opportunities? I think that developers should monitor the implementation of the omnibus law to be sure that it boosts indeed the Indonesian competitiveness. So they should look at the way in which this law is brought to the market. Moreover, developers should cooperate with the authorities in the economic corridor developments to be sure that they meet investors' expectation. And this is the moment really for Indonesia to become a regional hub, attracting first and foremost those FDIs that are outflowing from China, Malaysia, and Singapore. 6th point, a new approach to affordability. So forget about the government as developer of houses. We should move from a rhetoric of homeownership to a rhetoric of flexibility, so freedom of choice. We should stress the importance of promoting social mobility by having an holistic approach to connectivity, in particular thanks to a private-public partnership in develop public transport projects with the involvement of developers since day one. So developers can become the main supplier of public transport services, conceived as an essential part of new urban developments. So we shift our focus from the simple housing development to a wider perspective of urban developments, and this will be more both financial and ecological sustainable, and also a new opportunity for developers to explore new area of intervention. That's all for today. Again, thank you very much for your attention and for having given me the opportunity to share with me my thoughts. Thanks to the organizers, thanks to Provalindo Nusa, and in particular to its president, Mr. Chandra Rambe. If someone is interested in the presentation, I can provide it. Just drop me an email. And I don't know if now there is a Q&A session. I'm ready to answer questions.
Thank you, Dr. Carmelo Ferlito, for the insightful sessions. Thank you for sharing your presentation, and wish you good health and a very good afternoon for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So for our last session, please join me in welcoming Dr.